Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast.
My name is Chris Flisher. You know, this is a show about astrology, and astrology is a fascinating time to be involved with because there's so much activity on the planet these days. Not just the pandemic, but everything we see in the planet. And a lot of this has been reflected over the years. You know, many astrologers that I've been talking with over the years, we were talking about some sort of major catastrophe of some sort, some major change happening right around this time. So when Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto got together, boom, here comes the coronavirus, and it's not what we expected maybe 10 years ago. But it is, I thought maybe it might be a political problem. I thought maybe it might be a war problem. I thought it might be an economic problem. Well, it turns out that it's actually all three in one. So we're really in the soup in this one. But we're all hanging in there and trying to keep ourselves above water. So I wish everybody out there to stay safe. Before I get my great guest on, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, I do a couple of paragraphs of mundane astrology as it applies to all of us. And then I break it out in the individual signs. I also have links there to my television show where you get a lot of educational astrology programs, as well as my archives and my art as well. So it's all there if you want to see it. That's there. So my guest today is one only, Agneta Borstein. She's been on before my show. She's great. She's a real expert on the nodes. And we're talking about the nodes today because the nodes just changed signs about, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, something like that. But we'll get the details from her, the actual facts. I don't have it on the top of my head right now. But Agneta is working out of Connecticut, and her website is Agneta Borstein, AgnetaBorstein.com, AgnetaBorstein.com, and we'll get her email when she gets on as well. So welcome to the show today, Agneta. It's great to have you back on.
Thank you, Chris. My pleasure, and it's good talking to you again in a very exciting, difficult, but yet there is a lot to be thankful for as well. So let's see what we can do.
You know, it's very interesting. I've been thinking about this myself a lot, is that how it's changed society, how it's changed the way we are. But I love the fact that it's having such a positive impact on the environment. You know, the waters are getting clear, the airs are getting clear. I find that to be a nice little, bonus to all we have to go through here.
Yep.
So we want to talk about the nodes today. We've talked about the nodes in the past, and I know you've written books about them. And I'm just curious, the background of where we are now. We're in a new set of nodes. The nodes recently went from Cancer to Capricorn, which was all about the home and structure. And we saw the pandemic drive all that stuff because we're all sitting in our homes. But now we've moved into the Gemini Sagittarius axis. And I'm curious how you think that might change the dialogue for the next 18 months or so.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. The nodes have always fascinated me. The two books, especially the last one, which the moon's nodes, understanding the dynamic ties that bind. We are very aware of eclipses. It's an in thing, the eclipses. I have paid attention to them for quite a few years. Matter of fact, I did get married during a lunar eclipse 32 years ago.
Wow,
so I'm very involved with the first book was about churning, because eclipses can scare you, but they are so powerful. Yet in the simplistic language of astrology or the moon's nodes, they are really just the sun and the moon. And when we learn astrology, what's your sun sign, what's your moon sign, what's your ascendant? So it's more like a search for deeper sense, which also becomes very practical. So yes, May 5th, they moved into Sagittarius, Gemini, North Node Gemini and South Node Sagittarius, which is the basic thing about the past and the future. But when we go a little bit further, number one, we want to say that just having having experienced Cancer Capricorn for quite a while, they are still going to, and that's the interesting thing. I want your audience to see where in the chart is the now Gemini Sagittarius coming through for 19 months. That's the basic duration of a nodal shift. And that's, Jupiter moves a year. So the nodes, you can pay a lot of attention to it. Of course, we know Gemini, Sagittarius. We might talk about some few Geminis in this session, quiz. But also to look at Pisces, Virgo, because that becomes a square, of course.
A square, yeah,
So,
of course, yeah.
Yeah. But I also want to remind ourselves that they overlap. For example, most of the time there's the 4 eclipses during 1 year, but of course 2020 with all the stuff that we go through have to have 6 eclipses. So we still really want to make sure that the axis of Cancer Capricorn still going to remind about the new reality so that we can go into positive ways of looking at Gemini Sagittarius. So the solar eclipse on June 21st is 0° Cancer, which we know is in this 0° critical point.
Yeah, very
anoretic,
critical.
woo,
Yeah,
that's and then also the July 5th lunar eclipse, which whether you use the Sibley chart for the 13 degrees or the
Right.
Gemini ascendant for the 12 degrees Capricorn. I do not really define, that's Cancer and that's Capricorn, because they have to happen together. Do you see that?
Right.
That they are one
But
and the same.
isn't July 5th directly opposing the U.S. Sun at 13 Cancer?
That's my point.
Yeah.
Then the other point of the nodes is Cancer. So you don't want to look just as Capricorn. They are, in my mythological, which is my passion, my commitment to meditation for over 40 years, the Hindu, going to India and meditate.
Yeah.
So it's a churning process that if you are aware that they really never separated, even though Vishnu, the god Vishnu, cut them in half and there they are, south and north and south. But they really together, and that is very beautiful for us to see where we go now in this segment of your great radio show, that we pay attention to Gemini and Sagittarius to see where are they in your chart, because it might benefit. You might say, I don't have anything in Gemini. I don't. But everybody has a house of Gemini or Sagittarius. So in that churning process, it's also preparation to see the fate that we now encounter in many things that we can do as just looking at this will last, this section here, this session of Gemini Sagittarius will last to mid-January of 2022. Where do we go in 2021? So don't you think, Chris, okay, basic foundation of Gemini, what do we do? Talk, nerves, scattered, but mind over matter. When we put Gemini together, it's about applying things that has come our way. What media do we trust? Where do you get our news? People disagree, wear a mask or not. That's that part of this, to me, sadness. I don't fight, but that's part of what I feel can benefit your audience by taking a look to see what are you saying anyway. And so then when we are, I am still loving my travel. And I had plans to go to Sweden, which if some of you have noticed my slight accent, I'm Swedish. So there I'm going with my family in Sweden. Oh, no protection, but let's talk about that later. Just to focus on the benefit of knowing Gemini mind over matter and make sure we no, we have to be careful with travel because, of course, that's Sagittarius and Gemini.
Right.
Gemini might be short travel. I like to go far away. I always travel.
And Sweden is not on lockdown right now. They're not on isolation, right?
It's a very interesting observation that here we might say we cannot compare. Sweden has 10 million people, yeah, and here is 330. But it's still a very powerful country. As a matter of fact, it's a Gemini country. So that, yes, very interesting. So when I have then heard, and of course I talk to my family quite often, in the beginning, it was like, nah, because it's a true democratic country where you do not tell the people to wear a mask, do this or do that. So what I have heard during the last months, and I hear their voices now, more concerned than in the beginning when the government cannot tell their people what to do. So they are encouraged to wear a mask. You don't have to. They are encouraged to have that 6 feet distance. But if they don't comply to that, for example, bars has been closed for a long time. They do close restaurants if you're too close, but they do it in a way of a democratic way, not like here, if you don't mind. I don't know about all the other countries, but here they said, you better wear a mask. And then they fight about that in the grocery store. Like, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Like, who is the bodyguards here? So in Sweden, it's a free will. I just spoke to my girlfriend who has a birthday today, June 25th, and they are out having dinner. And no mask, and they are more like, she did for the first time, to me, have a slight different voice. Well, it's a lot. People are dying. They're dying everywhere. So if that was their free choice, not to force people to stay home, to do this, all the application that many countries have done, that's their free will.
So yes, I see. So they put the onus on that, but aren't they worried about the one person, sort of the weakest link in the chain? If one person gets it, then that can spread, and then exponentially you've got a problem.
Well, if you were over 70 years old, you do not go out. That they were very firm with that. And now they let you see with far distance. If you had grandchildren, they let you see them.
Okay.
And also what we don't hear here, this it's not fake news. I read a Swedish paper often. But my niece and nephew, they have worked home for a long time. You don't hear, what do you hear anyway with this Gemini Sagittarius? What is the truth? So if I cannot tell anybody, you too, Chris, what we have to do, but here we have we have so many people here. And I tend to say I'm more cautious than anything, children, grandchildren. So I feel it is good for me to say I was going to go to Sweden. No, I'm not going to travel, Sagittarius or Gemini. I do it all the time, but it's still for your audience to say, like, mind over matter for the next year and the year and a half. And then that will move us into the sign of Scorpio, Taurus, and so forth. There's always an overlaying, but basically they move fairly fast. So with the eclipses coming on too, that now as of June 5th, there is a Sagittarius eclipse, and then they move away and continue being Sagittarius, Gemini, and then in the 2022 they start to be into the Taurus, Scorpio. So we have this tool of looking at, of course, we use regular transits. And I also kind of looked up to say, if you and I, Chris, had talked about when the nodes were so active we already know Jupiter, Pluto, and the Saturn.
Back in January.
Capricorn. That's more things like, what have you done lately? Have you taken care of your health? How have you catered for those that are in your home, or Capricorn? And as I would like to share my impression of Greta Thunberg, who that
yes, of course, Greta, of course, she's Swedish, right? Yes, she is.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I have looked at news. I listen to the news, but if we take just back, I followed her for a whole year in 2018. This whole shift in Capricorn moving over so strong in 2019, and here we are, in the now. And when you look at her birth information. I don't have her birth time. I will. I've had tried so hard, but she is born January 3rd, 2000.
Yeah, I know she was a Capricorn. Yeah.
And moon Capricorn.
Interesting
And
that she came to light in that under this period too.
I
Great.
love it. And she
Yeah.
has a Mercury retrograded in Capricorn too.
And this sort of speaks to, I think of with Saturn being in the mix with this Capricorn when we had the Capricorn conjunction. I
Yeah.
always think of Saturn as being sort of the responsible one, someone who's kind of holding your feet to the fire, the taskmaster. And when she came out, she really was, even though she's this young woman, she comes out and she's yelling at these politicians and sort of holding their feet to the fire, saying, "Hey, come around. You've got to do it now or never." And I find it to be very, very, amazingly accurate, and it's just apropos for the times, just perfect.
Yeah. I felt too that maybe if everything is for a reason, we didn't want this virus to happen at all. We knew, like you had introduced your show, that 2020 would be very important. But we didn't want to envision this whole virus, like a pandemic. But what she did to me was showing Capricorn, showing the government, you have got to stop this abuse.
Yes.
To the earth. So she not only did abuse to the earth, I think she woke up something in that Cancer Capricorn archetype that now will be manifested. How, like I would say, Greta, how dare they not listen to the disaster that is going on?
Right.
How do we go out to the world in the new world? And that's another topic that I might have to come back, because my latest passion is how loud the gods are speaking.
They're speaking very loudly. Well, this is what I thought. Yeah. This is my whole estimation, or my sort of description of the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunction was large, meaning massive, which would mean Jupiter.
Right.
Responsible, which is Saturn, and then Pluto would be correction, large, responsible correction. And this is sort of what we're in the midst of, because we are correcting a lot of the way we live right now. I mean, just the simple fact that this has reached in such an amazing social experiment, you think about it, because we're seeing huge bodies of people home, the stores are closed, the streets are clean, there's no pollution in the air, the water, these are all remarkable byproducts of this time. And it's just so it really is a very wide open, wide awake slap across the face for us all.
Yes, well, that's true. But if you are that esoteric and saying everything is for a reason, then maybe Greta was the metaphor of breaking that, the barriers of Capricorn, the government saying, are they ever going to listen? So that's part of the hope that Gemini Sagittarius will be able to open more communication, have more science. Of course, in that Sagittarius might be learning higher states of really implement, and there's the hope for the outer planets to do its whole integration of the new, which does go up to 2025 and 2026. That would
when we get back to the real true
I did even a workshop about that, but here we are with the nodes to give the audience and ourselves that, of course, if you are Gemini Sagittarius, you will have to look at that whole, process, how it could affect your life.
Yes.
For example, Greta, she has her nodes in the Gemini. Her north node is in Gemini, south node in Sagittarius, and there is this node of return going on in Gemini Sagittarius now, so that we can look at, are you listening? Is there something else that you need to learn? And number one, everybody's meditating because they're home, or we hope they're meditating, to calm their nerves down. Instead of going into the grocery store and saying, you're not wearing a mask, and why are you wearing a mask? And I just saw it yesterday. It's just very sad.
It is very sad.
And that's where it goes to Sweden and America. We have free choices. What's your choice, Chris? What is my choice? And that's what I think is going to be very important for people who are trying to step out now. I am very cautiously. And
but we also live in a world we are bombarded by information. I think every day we are just completely bombarded, which is a very Gemini trait, is information. And I think that what has struck me over the last several years in particular was the presence of Neptune in Pisces, because that really is, that's the definition of fake news, if you ask me. I mean, it's sort of this
Oh yeah,
obscure
yeah.
area where, what's going out is not, what we're seeing is not real. And I think that was epitomized by when the president came out to made his acceptance speech. He came out in a veil of fog. I mean, fog
Mm,
is the definition of Neptune. It's just that obscure area. So this is very relevant timing for this, and it
yeah.
seems like the astrology is so accurate for where we are in the world right now. Just that's what I love about it. So interesting.
Totally amazing. Yeah.
And
And
it's
the
not,
whole
of course, we have Venus in
platform.
retrograde now too. Venus in retrograde and Mercury are both in Gemini, and
Yeah.
the
Right.
nodes are in Gemini as well. So it's a really interesting time where what is being said and what is being seen, all the whole communication, whether it's being verbal or whether it's being visual. There's the whole idea of in popular politics, the idea of optics. People want to get their picture taken at just the right time, so it looks as if they're doing more than they may be doing. So there's that sort of, the other day Trump did not want to have his mask on because he was going to this plant. He doesn't want anybody to see him with his mask on. But
Mhm.
that's sort of
Yeah.
controlling the narrative, which is controlling the optics of the situation. Both those words, narrative and optics, are really Gemini
Interesting.
words.
Oh, they are. Yeah. Well, here's a whole set of a
That's a
whole
different story
different
altogether. I know. And
chapter.
he's a Gemini too. He's a Gemini, so that's even,
Yes,
yeah.
and that
And
would
so
be very interesting if because it's not that I love America. It took me a long time to become American citizen because I really don't understand the politics here.
yeah,
Being
well, you're not
Swedish,
alone.
I'm neutral. I stay neutral, but of course I'm not in parentheses. But when you see this Gemini, and that would be very interesting for all of us to step back and say like, now what? I don't
Mhm.
want to go in if he's going to continue this and that, but his chart looks pretty clobbered, as in tight, because now when the nodes goes into the Gemini Sagittarius on May 5th, they will churn. They will be in his 10th and fourth
Fourth,
house.
yeah.
So no matter if it is the sun on the eclipse and the this and the that, he's going to really have a challenging time in the public, as we know already.
Right.
And also, what he does have, that Saturn Venus conjunction, and how he always sits with his arm crossed, that's all insecurity. I
Hmm.
don't want to say I feel sorry for the guy, but he is so scared.
Oh, he's
And they,
very, very scared. He
yeah,
represents
yeah,
that completely. Yeah.
yeah. And then also with those eclipses not hitting, well, they do hit him, the ones that we just talked about, June 21st and July 5th, but his country, are they going to go crazy? I don't like that July 4th. I will stay home.
Yeah.
you
I
know,
mean, it seems like
and
a very volatile time because
it is, yeah.
the natives, the natives are restless. It was a word I was going to say, and that's accurate
Um,
because the people are very animated, and there's so much division and polarity right now that it's just
it's amazing.
incredible. It's scary. I mean, we're almost on the brink of what you could see as a civil war in some ways because of people refusing, and then of course we don't know. And the other thing that's always has me concerned a little bit is when these planets, when they're all in retrograde. Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all going retrograde back, and they're going to be going back to around the same degree with the coronavirus first struck in
Definitely.
September, October, which is when the doctors are saying it may come back with a vengeance, just as it did in 1918. So that's a concern we should
Absolutely.
keep
Yeah.
our eyes on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, what I had, how we kind of have our reaction. I did not, in the fall of 2019, I did not like to see those three conjunction with Jupiter, Pluto. I'm
No.
jumping up in my living room and tell my husband, I said, wow, people are going to die. They're going to kill each other over this stupid election. And,
Hmm.
and just in general, people will die because Jupiter, as good as he is in my chart, he's not my favorite planet. You know that two sides of the coin. And
Oh, of
Pluto,
course. Yeah.
the number one death. And when they come together, April 4th, June 30th, and November 12th, then, after November 12th is after the election.
Hmm.
And Trump has a nodal return that is not great. His karma is on the wall, even though we don't, wish him ill, but maybe his writing is on the wall. How
Well,
he,
you have to, in some ways, you have to reap what you sow. He has certainly
yeah.
not been a very kind person in many ways. I know people who support him, and this is not meant to be a political statement,
No,
but
no, I don't.
just by, when you make fun of handicapped people and you call other people and you make names and you sync that to like, kindergarten or playground kind of mentality, you're showing something about you that's very, very unsavory. It's just not, it's just very unpleasant.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and then I was just thinking about who else is a Gemini, and I did not know that Boris Johnson is an
Yes.
Gemini. So I looked that up. It's like, well,
Yeah,
they look alike, they act alike.
they
But
do.
then when you look at what we could share with your audience, that Boris has a 0 Cancer North Node, which was when he
Oh.
had a baby, so that's also a blessing. So he has a new life, but his career being a Gemini, and he has a lot of Gemini actually. So you have these characters that are ruling us
And
and do
I don't think we've ever
life.
had a Gemini president before because Geminis, they are very, they flip-flop. They go back and forth. They do a lot of things. They talk a lot. They often
Yeah.
talk a lot and don't say much. And
Right, right.
interesting point about Boris Johnson is that he and Trump were both born in New York City somewhere. And even though he's a British citizen, he was born in New York.
I did not know that either, because thank you for inviting me again. I looked it up. I said, oh, he's born in New York, and
Yeah, they're
very
about 20 years
interesting.
apart, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and they are kind of many times kind of like compared, or they're here, or
Yeah, they sort of
they're
have a clown-like, presence to them. They're sort of goofy in some regard, And it's such a
yes,
funny thing to watch. I mean, it's hard to believe that we're being run by this. I mean, it's
yeah,
just
it's
really,
amazing.
especially when you think back to the days of Churchill and Roosevelt, and it's just, you can't even imagine this,
Yeah, yeah.
this where we are today.
Yeah, right, right. But also the whole Jupiter, which is not the nodes, but they are affecting Trump's public image. And on my
Yes. Yeah.
personal level, I don't have the right to be a Trump's therapist, but I think a lot of his um, obnoxious treatments for women at times, or through his life, comes back to his moon and his south node, very close in the fourth house.
Hmm.
Don't want to blame everything on the mother, but there's a lot of family dynamics there.
There
So
are, and I've even said this before on my show that there are times, and I don't have them very often, when I actually do feel sorry for him because I see how damaged he is, and it sort of
mm,
has this. You can't almost, see. I mean, in order to react and act the way he does, he has to have this inner pain, and that inner pain is not going away, and he's been carrying it around for 72 years. It's just,
yeah, yeah,
it's very deeply, and we're not therapists, but we can just see this, and it's through the eyes of astrology that we work, and we talk about this stuff, and that's part of the. You can't
yeah,
deny the sort of the mechanics of astrology and the fact that they're so accurate right now.
yeah, right, absolutely, yeah. And that's where you don't want to predict, as I was the one that said, oh, Hillary will win. So you don't want to step out, because then we might
Then
just,
you look foolish.
then we
Yeah.
predict, and we say whatever, but it does not look good.
Mhm.
To me, that's part of his insecurity. And then that November 12th, third hits his Saturn Venus
Yeah.
in that respect, to say, like, well, let's see how he really feels,
Hmm.
and so forth. So we just hope people continue being safe with that Sagittarius, Gemini. People want to talk, they want to go out,
They want to
and of course
explore.
the
They want to
Zoom
travel.
and all that stuff, new platforms, it's going to change so much. And
Hmm.
that, to me, does go on, that even though it definitely will stay for the whole year. And then the beginning of 2021, it's still
Mm.
not safe the way I see it, but I think we would get more used to this new reality. I think that November, again, when the scientists say, oh, it's going to come back with those eclipses and the whole Jupiter Planet conjunction, I do feel so that
Yeah, it seems like a
still,
very ominous period of time, and then,
yes,
that's
it
the whole
is.
thing. We don't know what that's going to be like, and if the thing that concerns me probably more than anything is the fact that a lot of the jobs that have been lost are not coming back, and just because of the nature of the. I mean, who's going to fly anymore? I mean, how are they going to even arrange flying when you're in a room in a metal tube with the same air? I mean,
I,
it's even if
uh,
you have masks on, you're still going to have a problem, I would imagine. But I don't know. I don't know this stuff, and I want to
yeah,
travel too. So
yeah,
it's very
that I'm
difficult.
still thinking that we don't know that, and that's the practical part of Sagittarians, the education of it, the science of it,
Right.
the not worrying about it. If you feel like you're going to go, you're taking a risk. It's like a live or die.
It is.
You have the free
It is.
choice,
And it's
for
also very
sure.
spiritual. It can be a spiritual time as well, which I think is important because, the Sagittarius has that strong sort of religious, sort of spiritual bend, and I think that's a good place. People may be rethinking their lives now because of this
Yeah,
virus and how they relate to whatever sort of belief system they are in subscribed to. And I
yeah,
think, it makes us all, and those are all topics that are on the table. So it's really fascinating. We're talking today with Agneta Borstein. She's an astrologer out of Connecticut. Her website is Agneta Borstein. It's AGNETA BORSTEIN.com, AgnetaBorstein.com, and she's written a lot of on the news, on the nodes, and the churning of that churn.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Hello and welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My guest today is Agneta Borstein, and we're talking today about the nodes. The nodes just changed from Cancer to and Capricorn axis to the Gemini Sagittarius axis back on the beginning of May 5th. And the nodes always go backwards around the zodiacal wheel, and they are, they're sort of ominous because they are great predictors, and of course they are the ones that deliver the eclipses, and they stay in a set of signs for about 18 and a half months, and then every 18 and a half years, roughly, they come back to where they were. So if we go back in time to 18, 19 years ago, we see another major event happening in the United States. We see a time of 9/11 happening. So these things are sort of cyclical in nature, and this is what is so fascinating about astrology in general. So it's interesting to see that.
It was, and I had noticed that too, because sometimes you do a little research. It's like, whoa, that ultimately free choice comes into where have you done lately? And it's interesting to do notice or contemplate on the fact that how is the breathing techniques in you? Have you paid attention to your health? Are you, the pranayama, are you breathing when you take your walks? And that is the lungs. And look at this virus coming right into the lungs. So I think that I don't want to say what you should take, but, there's a lot of different alternative herbs and, elderberry and, vitamin D or whatever. I do that anyway.
Yeah, so do
I. That's just like part of it. But that's a good education for people to say. And I feel so, it's like Agneta, I'm okay, but I feel very, very sorry for those people who have not taken their ways of living and being able to walk and talk. So I'm still doing that, and different platforms, we still have to say, what have you done lately and what are you going to do about it? And that's where, we go into these new ways of some people. Let me just put in this as another. I have actually done a whole workshop on this, like how loud the gods will speak, and I like to read something at the end of our session, Chris.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But just to look at this whole thing about there is a shift, and if we're going to listen, as in 2021, when the virus slows down a little bit, we go into 22. Those are the hope that I so sensitive and sincere from my heart to say, then we have to be patient to see the new world. Remember that old New Age stuff?
Right. Yeah, I know.
And according to the scriptures, there is a lot of different variations, but the way I have most time read about what is the new age, that is basically 2025. And when we look at both Pluto entering Aquarius in 2024, Uranus goes into Gemini 2026, and the little guy Neptune that you mentioned goes into Aries in 2026. So in the faith that it's not that we needed this, it's not that we wanted this experience that we go through now, but that's when maybe the visionary, as Greta Thunberg, or the government, because have they really listened to them, their own selves?
Right.
Well, as they are the government, it's the government that has to step in. We're doing our share. We protest. We do our astrology stuff. Mm-hmm. So that to me is really, we are where we need to be at all times. And
right. And I think that this is sort of when I mention a wake up call, I think of it as I think the other analogy for it would be like a pendulum swinging, and the pendulum is swinging so far one direction that it has to turn and go back. So maybe we've reached that far end of the pendulum, where we're all the way over to one angle, and then it's going to begin to come back. And then I think the lessons of the pandemic they be there for us, and we will either we learn by the lessons or we don't learn. But I think that the more severe, and I don't mean this to be a threat, or I don't want this to happen, but the more severe things are, the more people pay attention. Otherwise, they become very apathetic and they don't pay attention. So this has really forced a lot of us to rethink our lives, rethink our relationships, rethink the way we live in our daily life. How do we socialize with people? Everything has changed, and that's really it's a stark reminder of how fragile we are and how much we are at the hands of nature.
Right. And, I get sad. I don't get mad when I see people who are, what was it in Michigan? They come out with a protest. I think that's a minority. Do you agree with that, Chris?
I think it's a minority.
We are the majority of
it just looks what I hear. Because they give them airplay. They give them, since they're on the television, it looks bad. And it probably was 500 people, but, the majority of people in America are not like that.
I feel so, because then you have the two poor grocery stores that just have to be bodyguards to get food, and this is our country too, and it's the whole world. If you see that it is very real, so that people who then have to protest, and you sometimes look at Facebook views, there's like, well, this is all not real, it's not as serious as the government say. But when you look at not just America, never mind Sweden, there's a free choice, but now it's hitting Brazil. Like, whew,
I know. And then once it gets when it gets into other countries that are maybe not as haven't got the services that we have, like what happens when it gets to the continent of Africa? What happens when it gets to India? I mean, I can't imagine how they're going to even maintain it in India with all the overpopulation that's there. But I mean, I guess they've got to they're on a lockdown process right now.
Yeah. So it's hard not to talk about the current situation, but we also want to give ourselves and the audience the hope that, because Gemini Sagittarius is the future, it's how, if we have to stay home for a while and work from our home, which is different ways, platforms of communicating. There is companies that have said we will never have offices. So therefore, that when we go into the Pluto return in the United States chart, which is 2022, that's just going to be part of it. It's not really perfected at that time, because there's more to do, that Pluto has to go into a different platform in 2024. So with that, it shows us patience to allow our mind with people that are like, I have a new grandchild. He's 5 days old.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
What is his future?
Oh,
we have our minds, how we do things. And of course, as we should say, this shall pass. But
it will pass, and we know that. And I think that, you mentioned real, and I see one of the big things that, when we think about what sort of the long-term repercussions of this whole, pandemic change has brought upon us, the idea that real estate in some ways may very well be different, because people don't want to be in places like big cities. And if they can telecommute via computer, using Zoom or Skype or whatever. Why spend the enormous rents to have these office buildings filled with people, and they come back and forth on the trains, they drive their cars in? Maybe have fewer of them out there, and that may impact the real estate market, which is a Capricorn domain, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's why too this strong conjunction, and you had mentioned Neptune too.
Yeah.
Even like in 1852 or the 1850s, when last time Neptune was in Pisces,
Right.
it also is like a new vision, new faith.
Yes. Yeah. It was like the Theosophical Society and sort of the Theosophists,
totally.
Thoreau,
And that is also giving us faith to listen more to signs. Is the government Capricorn? Of course, later on it will only be Pluto left in Capricorn, but it's still important. Like was it one government that said, "Oh, we got to do something about that"? And you do read more. I think, I hope that this has
I've been reading a lot more. Yeah, well, that's one of the things we can do.
Yeah.
I can't. Well, I'm not a big TV watcher. I mean, I can watch a little bit, but I don't like it for by and long. I
No,
never watch TV during the day. It's always depressing.
Oh yeah, no. Then I'm busy with all the stuff and enjoying, taking walks, taking care of yourself, and cautious.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Right. So if we have to then eventually be able to reach out to a different platform, the way perhaps the little I know you, or the know you, Chris, is the alternative ways about appreciating every day we are here, could be the lesson too for other people, for those that might not have thought about breathing, lungs, studying. This is a good time too for people to take up studies with Sagittarius, Gemini. You never got to something. Now you're forced to be home, and your books comes more to play too. The audio, listening to different ways of being alert. That to me is the Gemini Sagittarius. Yeah, right.
All of our entertainment platforms are all based on, that's a Gemini role right there.
Totally. So that's that blessing in the sky of saying, like, we really didn't want this. As you had mentioned earlier at your opening, we knew Jupiter, Saturn would be prominent. But I think that whole Capricorn, the government, are they paying attention? That's interesting. Sweden can say, oh, you don't have to do anything, but they do in their own way. As here we are forced, and how is other countries? That's a whole different ways of looking at a new future, for sure.
Do you think it's the size of the country that it's easier to maintain and manage that sort of arrangement, or do you think it's just it's sort of the mindset of the Swedes?
Outside, we are safe. It's been a country that's prefer not to do wars. You know, the World War I and II, always been neutral. When I talk to my relatives too, at first they sounded like, oh, we're good. And then I have to work at home. And one family member has a restaurant. It was down very fast. Not what we hear on the news. So here you go. The real news is that they are cautious, but I have always been impressed by how many people are living in America, how big it is, how powerful it is. Is it going to be that powerful after this? So many people with the unemployment, it will be picked up, but we had to have so much because we are a cancer country, of course. So maybe we don't know that, but we know staying in the moment is very important for the government to step up. What else can we do?
I think that things are going to change dramatically, to be honest. I think that we're going to see a whole different, arrangement in the country. I think I think like every empire, whether it be the British Empire or whatever empire, the Roman Empire, they all have their ups and downs. And I think that we sort of hit the end of our time. Not to say that we're going to go down in flames, but that we're probably not going to have the same stature in the world that we once had. You know, we don't need to have that. I think China will take over in some ways. At least they're certainly making it a run for it, because they're pouring tons of money into the infrastructure of different countries. They're building dams in Africa. They're building train tracks across all of Russia. So all of these things are going to lead to their influence being far greater. And I just think that that's an interesting, and maybe it's just time for the role to change and for someone else to take up that job.
Yeah, right. We have done enough, and it might take a long time to be the same powerful country, which
Oh
is
yes, I think
part
so.
of what it was kind of. I might have mentioned it, but it was very confusing to come from. I love America, but it was also like you have to vote on a movie star as Ronald Reagan. I was
Right.
confused, but now I think I have my vote in the right place, if you
Mhm.
will. But it's big. It's a very big country.
It's a
Therefore,
very
it's
big country
so
with lots of different influences. The thing about it is because of you look at Europe, for example. You've got Europe is you've got countries side by side, but each of them have their own distinct language, their own distinct culture, their own
absolutely.
distinct identity. And
Yeah.
here we have the South as its own identity, but it's not a nation unto itself. It's part of the United States. And so
Yeah.
the size, so when you have this much geography in between you and the West Coast, there's bound to be
Oh,
changes of influence.
big different, yeah.
Mhm.
And that is for us to step back and look at decisions that they are making with the Sagittarius and Gemini
Right,
influence that you hope that people can come together because
right.
it is a life and death
It
situation.
is. I
And
think
it's
of
not,
Gemini, yeah, it's a very curious, a very curious sign. As we all know, they're very curious,
yeah,
and that to me spells research, which would help the idea of getting research together, getting people talking together through different formats to try to find a solution for this. I think it opens up the door for the dialogue to begin.
yeah,
And I think, that's what's an interesting side note of it too, as well, is that it's going to provide that the ability to talk. And it's going to be in Venus is going to be in Gemini for almost 4 months by the time it leaves, which is very unusual, a period
right,
of time for it to be there.
yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. We still have to take this whole year to step back and not be out there. What I wouldn't do, be out protesting, but we have to step back the whole year because it have shown. I mean, never mind. How did we feel in April? We were totally confused. Like what when the first Jupiter
Oh,
Pluto
right.
hit,
Yeah.
and then that's November 12th, which is after the election. So you have November 30th, the lunar eclipse in Gemini, and that hits Trump, and all that Gemini Sagittarius will be very important for what he represents. But what
Hmm.
we represent, we just want to move on, and that is going to, as we know, it's going to be a very important election. I was like, beyond any
Beyond any
imagination.
imagination. I know we thought that last
Yeah.
time, but this time it really is
And
real.
and then with that little Mars guy coming in
Yeah.
September, November to square that. So that's the reality. And in my way of looking at Gemini Sagittarius, it will be important. And of course, there's not so many transits on that. The most important is that the nodes will square Neptune. So
Hmm.
what are we seeing? Are we clearing the ocean? There's many. Have two different bigger clear up ocean. There's two big. I can't get them now, but he is an Netherlands young boy. They are really out there clearing the ocean.
Hmm.
Ocean.com. Oh gosh, right now I have that whole thing about hope. Neptune is hope. Neptune is
It
also
is.
about visualize different things and be real about it. Neptune is as real as any other planet.
It's about
I
dreams.
feel.
It's about
Yep.
hopes and dreams for sure, and it's also about illusion and delusion. So have great visions about where to go, but we can also be misled by that, and that's the thing. I think the squares tend to bring the action in a positive way, personally, because
Yeah.
they are forcing functions and they sort of force things to happen,
Right.
um, and as a result, you learn as a process of that. But one of the things I'm interested in is how do, and for the audience who are listening,
Yep.
how do you people think the node shift is going to impact them? And I guess that depends upon obviously their signs. And I would say that those people who are in of the mutable signs would be the ones who most feel it. So it'd be the Geminis, the Virgos, the Sagittariuses, and the Pisces, because you said they're all in the squares. They would all be feeling that.
Right.
And if you have sensitive points at any of those degrees, when you follow where the nodes are, when the nodes hit those points, do they become active?
Yeah. So it's not only the eclipses, because next year is going to be four eclipses, but it's to follow them to allow, as the name of my first book was, the churning process, just to be aware as, oh, now it's the full moon, now it's the new moon, but
Hmm.
to be aware where in your chart does it fall for those 19 months, for year six, a year plus 7 months, 19 months, they stay in one sign.
Right.
so that you know where there is at, and the opposite. I always work with opposites, so
Oh,
that
I
you
do too. Yeah.
follow that in that process. You can benefit it from a square. It's more about what I consider the sun is the spirit and the moon is the soul for search. So it
Right.
might just be more applicable for people who are searching, who are honest, who like
Hmm.
to grow in a positive way and communicate in the right way, and
Yes.
yeah,
I
and
agree.
the way.
And it's interesting because anybody who has a mutable sign or has sensitive degrees at the points of the nodes, that sort of churn is going to be an awakening of that energy, right? It's going to be a
Correct.
awakening wherever the house it's transiting, right?
Yes, right. That's what I want to emphasize. And even if you have a intercepted or whatever, they cut into another house, it's still that area that can do. And of course, the north and the south is also to be aware, have you take care of yourself in
Hmm.
the Sagittarius way? Is there a new way that you can implement the way that you have? Did you finish that book that you always wanted to write? Is this a good time for you to reach out to people and communicate on a different level? Is it
Right.
a good time to say, like, I never finished that? This is a very good time that just started now on May 5th and will go into January 18, 2022. So there's a year of integrate the new thought, the new ways, because we know Gemini, scattered, superficial, but mind over matter. To focus into that goal, into that new vision, then I think it's a good way to look at the eclipses at this point. And
Yeah.
we had
I
so,
always try to find something good because if the eclipses do
yeah,
bring to light what we need to see, and oftentimes we're
right,
just oblivious and blind to it. And I think these eclipses in particular are
yeah,
really bringing to light our dependence upon each other too. Because I see Gemini as a very yin yang kind of energy because it's got this energy of like it's a dualistic sign. And so
absolutely,
because of that churn, it gets people talking, it gets them to think about things in new ways, especially with the Sagittarius angle there brings in that whole spirituality concept
yeah.
and looking at life through different look. We have to redefine how we look at life. There's no question about it. You can't be in an elevator with 12 other people at a time like this. You just can't do
No.
it.
That's the patient. Yeah, Gemini's being patient.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
how can you possibly do
yeah,
that? And it's
yeah,
just, but it's a challenge, and that it's through the challenges I think that people grow the most. There's no question about it. Is that when they are
yeah,
challenged, that's when you grow. You don't grow when
yeah,
things are easy. You tend to just let things go.
yeah.
But if you're
Right,
challenged all
right.
the time, you know,
Yeah. And just thinking about this Gemini Sagittarius, there's also a time frame in the nodal return, which is your path of coming back. So there's certain ages that I have worked out, which is 18 and a half years old, 37 years and 3 months,
hmm
55 years and 10 months, which is, regrouping,
Yep, yep,
74 years and 5 months, 93 years old. We see more people, being 93 years old now. And
it's
so there
very
is
common.
that.
Yeah,
There could be also the age, which it didn't have to be Gemini Sagittarius, but the age is also then in your natal chart, of course,
hmm
as we said with the Virgo, Pisces, Gemini, and Sagittarius, would also be in a very thoughtful year, a very introspective, yet like where do we go from now, and seeing what you've been doing lately. Yeah.
Right. It's very. I mean, it's. This is one thing that this has taught us. I mean, where I live in a sort of a rural area outside of Boston, and I live, and I don't usually see a lot of people out walking, but now I see people walking all the time. I see people with families all the time walking.
Oh,
Teenagers
yeah.
walking with their parents, which never would have happened before, but they are forced to. And so
Yeah.
this makes people rethink their value system, makes them
Yeah.
rethink their connections and their love for each other. People, I'm sure, are getting on each other's nerves because of being home, but there's also this. It helps you review and rethink. Of course, I always use re as the retrograde
Yeah.
period. Anything with re in front, it makes us
Right.
reevaluate, reconsider
Right.
our relationships, and that can be a very positive thing.
Yeah, right. And the whole school system, we have
Yeah.
to comply and accept the new reality. That's also schools, Gemini, Sagittarius
Yes,
learning.
that's true. That's right.
Yeah,
Learning. How
different
about that?
ways.
Nine
Yeah.
taps. Yeah. And I think that so the nodes will be, and the eclipses will be very revealing over the course of the summer, because I think, the fact that the July 5th one is so close to the United States is really kind of
Yeah.
startling. I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know what
right.
that means.
I wonder if
Um, I
some
just don't know.
unhappy people might show up, but we stay safe.
Yeah, we stay home.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not going
yeah,
anywhere
right.
yet either. Yeah, but it does make you, when these things happen, they're sort of like every 18, 19 months, we get this major shift of, and what do you think the major shift does? I mean, you think that when the nodes are in the sign, they represent the aspects, the attributes of the sign, and then that changes, or those the attributes of the signs are then highlighted during that time?
That's what I'm calling the churning process. That's an
Right.
opportunity to pay attention to that part of your chart.
I
That
see.
it doesn't have to be that you have to have a certain strong natal thing. It affects you still when you really look at it. That could
Hmm.
be a trine. I use the trine when I work with the nodes. They
Yeah.
might not be like woohoo, but they are very noticeable when you are reminded the nodes are the intersection, the path of the sun and the moon coming together. They are
Yeah.
all there. So in that, it's quite simple. They are the sun and the moon, and
Hmm.
without them, they follow the moon's path on the ecliptic eclipses. So we should not just pay attention to the eclipses. We should pay attention to where they're at, and the fact that they're not done with Cancer, Capricorn quite yet. That's an important. Then they go away. Bye
Yeah.
bye.
So,
Yeah.
how do you think a
Yeah.
trine at a time like this, that would be a trine to something in Aquarius or something
Yeah.
in
The air
Libra?
sign.
What would
Yeah.
you think that would bring about? That would bring about an interesting sort of dialogue. I think the trines, they're softer. They tend to be more easier to endure, I guess I could
Yep.
say.
Yep. And
Um,
especially now when Saturn goes into Aquarius, eventually it's going to be in that 29 for the whole year to me. So then, but it's also to prepare yourself to say like, oh, I have a trine, I have Aquarius, Libra, Gemini, so that whether you manifest them and don't just let them come to you and you become lazy sometimes with trines, so that you benefit to say like, well, maybe this is a good time for me, make up my mind, follow my path. That's
right.
how I see them. Then it's an opportunity to tell the clients to enforce them instead of just looking at the quote unquote challenging,
Right.
difficult, negative. That,
Right, I know.
of
Well, you'd
course,
have to see it as a
happens.
time of opportunity, a time of great potential. And if you can act at
Absolutely.
that time of potential, then you can benefit from the combined sort of the energy that's there. It's a very supportive in that regard, because it's got this great energy that comes along with it, and it helps that
Yeah.
happen. I think it's very, very
Right.
important.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
So,
May I ask you, Chris,
sure.
with your timing? I just needed to help you because of the recording.
Yeah, we're
We
doing
still
fine.
good?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
we're doing fine. Yeah, so
Sorry. Thank you.
the piece of it that I think is interesting is that we look at we have to look at these things through the eyes of history, and I think that like you mentioned, we go back 19 years. Where were we at that point in our life? When we go back 19 years before that, where were we? And yeah, I think you'll find there'll be significant. Everybody's lives are different, and they all have our own transits, but I think you'll find a similar theme recurs at those times. Now, they may not be exactly the same because, as I always say, time is a corkscrew. So it goes around and around, but it goes down the road further,
Yeah.
and you're in a different context. So, yes, the theme may recur. There may be a great change. I mean, for me personally, I can speak to this. This is right on the money, because 19 years ago, my wife passed away, and here I am 19 years ago. Here I am 19 years in the future, and I'm selling the house that we built together. So
Oh,
it's all
yeah.
cyclical, and it's a very much of a theme, family-based theme for me. So it's really, and I'm acting in that way, and I'm preparing myself for it. It's been a difficult thing to move because I got a Cancer moon. I don't want to move my house,
Oh,
I
yeah.
but I do realize that this is a necessary product, and I think that once I get through it, I'll be better on the other side of it all. So I'm
I
looking forward
think
to it with
so. Yeah.
philosophically.
And yeah, but most of the time with eclipses, they happen naturally, but when they hit, they hit. So you might want to look at that whole process about the masters claim that everything is karma. And of course, that's
Mhm.
sometimes a misused word.
Yes, I know.
Karma, everything is karma. But when we put it into fate and destiny, how we choose our moons and the sun in that process of individuation. And of course, ascendant is important, but that's part of how I have worked with them for quite a few years. And you find that it reminds about the clients not too long ago. One of those like nice ladies, she goes, I don't know, nothing happens, but I just feel different. I like my life. Because that was a total nodal return. And then we have the half nodal returns, which is the reverse between the north and the south. So when you take yours, and thank you for sharing that 19 years, often things happen. And then if we take somebody that's 18 and a half or 19 years old, that's a very they're not 21 for their Saturn cycle, but they are still like, oh, I have it down, or do they? It's a very, very challenging, and that's why I feel compassionate for young, the college kids. Like, they have to learn so much new with this Gemini Sagittarius, new ways of,
a whole new way of looking too. And they can't learn the way they used to learn. They got to learn in their home on a computer screen instead of being in a classroom. Very different.
Totally,
it really is. So we have had an interesting talk here. We're out of time, unfortunately, but we could talk some more. We'll have to have you back on again to talk some more about this, because I think it's fascinating. When the nodes change, they really do take on a different flavor, and it's almost as if there's a different scene setting in the world. There's like in a play, it's a new stage setting, and it's a different lens through which we're looking. It's almost like you're at a club and they put a blue light across the filter, a filter across the light, and the room turns blue, and then they put a red filter across the room and the room turns red. And it's that sort of that change, that sort of subtle change with like the seasons and stuff. So it's interesting to know that. And it's been great having you on today. Once again, my guest has been Agneta Borstein. Her website is Agneta Borstein, Agneta Borstein.com, AgnetaBorstein.com. She's just gotten that. She's written a couple books. What are your two books? Your books are the Churning of the Soul?
So the first one was self-published, The Moon Knows, A Churning Process of the Soul. Right. It became quite, because of that, I guess because of my 6th and the 12th house, a little bit of depth in that book. So I rewrote it, and Abyss, which is a great publishing company, took it and I rewrote it. Good. Simplified it, if you will. And that is The Moon's Note, understanding the dynamic ties that bind, because everything is in a process. We are here for a short time, and the more we work, spirituality becomes very practical. And those books are on my web. Actually, a new website,
Good.
So that's been a pleasure.
Check that out. That's good. I'd love to hear that. Thank you so much for doing that, Eleni, because it's a lot to be learned from the nodes. People, it's not always a popular subject in astrology, but it's got a lot of depth there and incredible amount of wisdom that comes through the nodes. So thank you, Agneta. Once again, her website is Agneta Borstein. It's AgnetaBorstein.com, AgnetaBorstein.com. Thank you so much for coming on today, Agneta. It's been great talking to you.
You stay safe and stay healthy, as we say.
Healthy, that's right, yes.
Thank you so much, Chris.
You're welcome.
Take care. My pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.